Hi there! Welcome to What is Islam Academy. Let's learn about Islam together.
Why do we need old interpretations and traditions to understand the Qur'an? Can't we just read it ourselves, directly, and build our own understanding free from scholars and centuries of tafsir? This question reflects modern individualism, the idea that personal reasoning trumps historical wisdom. Let's explore why that's not only impractical but dangerous, and how tradition protects the clarity and unity of Islam. The Quran was not revealed into a vacuum. It entered a specific historical, linguistic, and prophetic context. Allah Himself establishes this framework, stating, "And we revealed to you the reminder so that you may explain to people what was sent down to them." Surah An-Nahl, 1644. This verse is a divine mandate, appointing the Prophet Muhammad as the primary living explanation of the revelation. His life was the bridge between the divine word and human understanding, making the guidance practical and accessible for all time. The Prophet explained the Quran through his speech, actions, and judgments. For instance, the Quran commands us to establish prayer, but provides no detail on how. It was the Prophet's physical demonstration, his Sunnah, that taught us the postures and units as he instructed, "Pray as you have seen me praying." Likewise, the Quran commands zakat, but the Sunnah clarifies the specific thresholds and percentages. Without his living example, these core pillars of Islam would remain abstract principles instead of actionable worship. Therefore, to reject this prophetic tradition is to disregard a direct Quranic imperative. Allah commands, "Whatever the messenger gives you, take it, and whatever he forbids you, abstain from it." The notion of following the Quran alone is self-contradictory, because the Quran itself repeatedly commands obedience to the messenger. This obedience is timeless, as his teachings were meticulously preserved by his companions and passed down through an unbroken chain of scholars, forming the robust science of hadith. Would you read a medical textbook and attempt surgery without a surgeon's guidance, or interpret a nation's constitution without its body of case law? The potential for disastrous misinterpretation is immense. In the same way, the Quran is the ultimate source, but the Prophet's Sunnah and the scholarly tradition are the indispensable tools for its correct application. To read the Quran without the Prophet's explanation is to have a map but no compass. He is the guide appointed by Allah, and through his example we find the clearest path. Let's say 10 people decide to reread the Quran without tradition. You'll get 10 different Islams, 10 new interpretations, 10 conflicting rulings. That's exactly what happened to other religions. In Christianity, personal interpretation led to thousands of denominations. In Judaism, different sects emerged, each claiming true Torah. Islam was protected by the chain of transmission, the preserved Sunnah, the community of scholars. You don't reinvent the wheel every century. You improve the ride, not deny the road. The Quran is divinely perfect, but its interpretation is a sacred science. Unlocking its treasures requires specific scholarly tools, mastery of classical Arabic, not modern dialects, knowledge of the Asbab al-Nuzul, the historical context for each revelation, cross-referencing verses to let the Quran explain itself, and understanding abrogation. All of this is governed by Usul al-Fiqh, the legal methodology that ensures a rigorous, consistent approach to the divine text. Without these tools, a person may confuse metaphor with the literal or apply rulings incorrectly. The most dangerous outcome is creating Quran-based heresies. The Khawarij are a stark historical warning. Their sincere but ignorant reading of verses like "judgment is for none but Allah" led them to condemn other Muslims as disbelievers and commit violence. This proves that sincerity without knowledge is a perilous combination, turning devotion into a destructive force. Consider the misuse of the verse. There is no compulsion in religion. It is often wielded out of context to argue against religious obligations for Muslims. However, the scholarly consensus is clear. This verse forbids forcing non-Muslims to convert. It does not cancel the specific duties like prayer, prescribed elsewhere for believers. To use one verse to negate hundreds of others is not interpretation. It is a selective reading that shatters the text's coherence. This is why the scholarly tradition is not a barrier, but our only reliable bridge to the Qur'an. It is a living, unbroken chain of transmission, an isnad, stretching back 1400 years to the Prophet Muhammad himself. This tradition represents the collective peer-reviewed wisdom of millions of scholars, filtering out error and preserving authentic meaning. It provides the depth, context, and consistency that protect the message from being distorted by individual whims and modern ideologies. The ultimate proof lies with the companions of the Prophet. They were masters of Arabic and witnessed the revelation, yet they constantly sought his clarification. When a verse on wrongdoing, zulm, was revealed, they feared it meant any sin. But the Prophet corrected them, explaining it specifically meant polytheism, shirk, and cross-referenced another verse to prove it. If the best generation needed direct guidance to avoid error, our need for their inherited wisdom is exponentially greater. If Abu Bakr, Umar, and Aisha learned the Quran humbly and in congregation, how can we, centuries later, claim the right to interpret it in isolation? The call to just read the Quran is a deceptive invitation to abandon our heritage and be guided by our own ignorance. True engagement with the Quran is a humble act of inheritance, learning from a tradition dedicated to preserving the Prophet's understanding. To discard these tools is not courage, it is ignorance masquerading as enlightenment. Ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. Surah An-Nahl, 1643. This is not a suggestion. It is a divine command. It establishes a fundamental principle for anyone who seeks to genuinely understand revelation. Allah continues this theme, telling us, He gives wisdom to whom He wills, and whoever is given wisdom has been given much good. Surah Al-Baqarah 2, 269. This wisdom is not random. It is a divinely guided understanding of the book, first and foremost granted to the one who brought it. That is why Allah did not simply send a book from the heavens, He sent a messenger, a living, breathing explanation of the text. The Quran itself defines His mission. And we have also sent down unto you the reminder that you may explain clearly to men what is sent down to them. An-Nahl, 1644. The Prophet's role was not merely that of a postman, he was the authorized interpreter. Consider the command to establish prayer. The Quran doesn't specify how many units, what to recite, or how to bow and prostrate. All of this comes from the Prophet's Sunnah, his lived example, when he commanded, "Pray as you have seen me praying." To abandon his explanation is to abandon the prayer itself. This vital knowledge was then passed to a blessed community, the companions. They were the immediate students. They didn't just hear the verses, they lived them. They witnessed the context of revelation, the understanding why a verse was revealed, to whom it was addressed, and the specific circumstances surrounding it. The companion Abdullah ibn Masud famously said, "By the one other than whom there is no God, no verse of the book of Allah was revealed except that I know concerning whom it was revealed and where it was revealed." Their proximity to the source is an unparalleled advantage that we cannot replicate, only receive. From this first generation, a legacy of knowledge was born, transmitted through an unbroken and verifiable chain of scholars. This is the genius of the Islamic tradition. The knowledge was passed from the companions to the successors and to the generations that followed. These early scholars, the Salaf, were not just intellectually brilliant, they were closer to the Prophet, learning from his direct students. They were closer to Arabic purity, as the classical language of the Quran was their living tongue, not an ancient text. And they were closer to the revealed events, inheriting the contextual knowledge that is indispensable for correct interpretation. This chain is our guarantee. Some may argue, but the Quran is clear. I can read it for myself. And yes, its core message is clear. But the Quran itself tells us it contains both clear-cut verses and allegorical ones. It warns that those in whose hearts is deviation will focus on the allegorical, seeking discord and seeking their own interpretation. Al-Imran 3:7. To approach the Quran without the tools of tradition is like trying to interpret a nation's constitution without consulting lawyers, judges, or centuries of legal precedent. The text might use simple words, but its application is profound and complex. It would lead to legal chaos. How much more so for the divine word, the blueprint for all of humanity? The Quran is not just a book to be read, It is a book to be understood, explained, lived, and transmitted. When this transmission is severed, interpretation becomes a mirror for our own ego, biases, and cultural trends. It is no longer reform, it is distortion. This is how a single, unified message splinters into 1,000 different personal Islams. The very division the Quran warns against when it commands us to hold firmly to the rope of Allah altogether and do not become divided. Al-Imran 3, 103. That rope is the Quran and the Sunnah held by the community and its scholars. The Quran is pure light. But without the lens of tradition, you are like a blind man standing directly under the sun. There is light everywhere, an overwhelming source of guidance, but you perceive nothing of its detail, its color, or the path it illuminates. The tradition of the Prophet and the scholarly legacy that preserved it are the eyes that God has given this ummah to see. Rereading the Quran is a noble and necessary act, but to do so, while discarding the 14 centuries of explanation, sacrifice, and preservation that brought it to you, is to choose blindness in the presence of light. It is to sever yourself from the messenger, the community, and the very legacy of knowledge that Allah established to preserve His final truth.